Colorado Territory, July 1873. The sun had just crested the ridge when Hunter Callahan reined in his horse on the dusty trail that cut through the open plains west of Trinidad. He squinted toward the horizon, where the heat was already starting to shimmer off the ground. That was when he saw them three figures walking slow, worn down by the look of it. A woman, holding a girl no older than 6 in one arm, and guiding a boy maybe 10 by the hand. Hunter kicked his boot against his horse's side and rode down to them. The woman looked up as he approached. Her dress was torn at the hem, dust coated her boots, and her cheeks were flushed under the dirt. The boy's lips were cracked, and the little girl's eyes drooped with exhaustion. Hunter dismounted slow, raising a hand. "You folks all right?" The woman's voice came out hoarse and thin. "We've been walking for days." Hunter's stomach twisted. "Where are you headed?" She blinked like she had not thought that far. "Anywhere with water." He stepped closer, careful not to spook the children. "There's a creek a mile west. Come on, I got a horse. We can get you there faster." The boy stepped slightly in front of his mother, protective. Hunter crouched to his level. "My name's Hunter. I am not going to hurt anyone, you got my word." The woman gave the faintest nod, and the boy relaxed an inch. Hunter helped the children up onto his horse, then offered his hand to the woman. She hesitated a breath, then took it. Her fingers were rough and trembling. "What's your name?" he asked as he led the horse beside him. "Willa," she said softly. "Willa Nolan. This is my son Mason and my daughter May." "You come from town?" She shook her head. "We were headed there. My husband died 2 winters back. Been working a claim with my brother since, but he got drunk and left us stranded outside Las Animas. Took the wagon and the last of our food." Hunter clenched his jaw. "He leave you out there on purpose?" Willa looked straight ahead. "I think he stopped caring what happened to us a long time ago." They reached the creek just as the sun began to press down hard. Hunter helped the children down first, then Willa. Mason rushed toward the water, dropping to his knees to drink, while Willa sank into the grass and held May close. Hunter led his horse to drink, then dropped his canteen beside Willa and crouched beside her. "You should drink." She unscrewed the cap with slow fingers. "Thank you." Hunter watched her, the way her hand shook as she brought the water to her lips, the way her eyes stayed fixed on her children. She had the kind of strength that went quiet. "I got a cabin an hour north. You can rest there a while." Willa hesitated. "You do not even know us." "I do not need to. You have 2 kids and nothing but the clothes on your backs. No one should be out here alone like that." She studied him. "You live there alone?" "Yeah." She took another sip. "All right." They rode slow, Willa behind Hunter on the horse with May asleep in her arms, Mason holding tight to the saddle horn. The trail wound up through low hills, past dry brush and whispering grass, until the cabin came into view, small, rough-hewn, but sturdy. A plume of smoke rose from the chimney where Hunter had left the hearth burning that morning. He helped them down and pushed open the door. "It is not much, but it is dry. There is food inside." Willa stepped in and stood still a moment like she was trying not to cry. Then she turned to him. "Thank you." Hunter nodded once. "I will get water heated. You all need washing up." He chopped wood, filled the kettle, and set it over the fire without asking for help. When he came back in, Willa and the children were sitting at the table, eating the bread and cold beans he had left out. Mason looked up. "You built this place yourself?" Hunter nodded. "Took me 3 years to get it right." Mason grinned, a flash of pride in his dusty face. "I want to build things too someday." Hunter smiled. "Well, you are welcome to help me patch the roof come morning." Willa glanced at him, her eyes softer now. That night, Hunter gave them the bed and rolled out a blanket near the hearth. The fire crackled low, and the cabin settled into quiet. Willa's voice came from the shadows. "You could have ridden right past." Hunter turned his head toward her. I was not raised that way. She was quiet a moment. Neither was I. He could see her silhouette in the moonlight, her hair falling loose over her shoulder. She looked tired, but the kind of tired that came from surviving everything and still standing. He rested his head back. You and the kids can stay as long as you need. Her voice was barely a whisper. Thank you, Hunter. He did not answer. He just listened to the fire and let the warmth of it settle into his chest. In the morning, Willa stood by the fire with her sleeves rolled up, stirring cornmeal mush. Her hair was tied back now, her face washed clean. She looked at home in a way that made something shift inside Hunter. Mason was outside with May, brushing the horse with a stick. Hunter stepped beside Willa. You all right? She nodded. Better than I have been in a long time. He watched her for a quiet moment. You planning on going back east? She shook her head. There is nothing left there for us. Hunter leaned against the doorframe. Then maybe you could stay here, not just for a while, for good. Willa turned, her eyes searching his. Why would you want that? He shrugged. Feels right. Her lips parted, but she said nothing. Hunter stepped closer, not touching her, just looking at her like he had not let himself before. You and those kids. You belong somewhere safe. You belong somewhere you are wanted. Willa's eyes glistened. She looked down, then back up. I do not know what tomorrow looks like. Neither do I, he said. But I would like to find out with you. She let out a shaky breath, nodded once, and Hunter reached out, gently brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. She leaned into his hand like she had not been touched in years. Outside, Mason laughed as May tried to climb onto the horse. Hunter looked out at them, then back at Willa. Looks like we got ourselves a family. Willa smiled, soft and real. Yeah, I think we do. Hunter stepped out early, the air still holding a chill before the sun climbed too high. The grass was damp from the night's dew, and dew meant the ground might hold long enough for fence work. He eased the barn doors open, careful not to wake the children, and began sorting through the cedar posts he'd cut last fall. Inside the cabin, Willa stirred a short while later. She pulled the quilt up over May's shoulders and eased off the edge of the bed, bare feet touching the cool floorboards. The quiet in the room felt unfamiliar too still for a woman used to listening for danger in sleep. She found her boots near the hearth and tugged them on with slow hands. When she stepped outside, she saw Hunter driving a post into the earth with a mallet, his shoulders tense with the rhythm of the work. He didn't notice her right away, but she didn't interrupt. Instead, she crossed to the edge of the pen and leaned against the split rail, watching. You always start before breakfast? She asked after a moment. Hunter looked up, wiping his brow with the edge of his sleeve. Only when the ground gives me a reason to. She nodded and folded her arms. I can help. His gaze lingered on her a beat longer than needed, but he handed her a pair of leather gloves from the fence rail. If you're sure. She took them without flinching. I didn't come here to be idle. They worked in tandem, the silence between them easy. She held the post steady while he drove them deep, and he adjusted the line when she stepped back to eye the spacing. Mid-morning brought the children out, May still rubbing her eyes, Mason already drifting toward the tools. Can I help too? He asked, tugging at Hunter's sleeve. Hunter glanced at Willa. If he's offering, she said, he means it. Mason ended up carrying small lengths of cut wire and watching Hunter's technique with sharp eyes. Willa stayed quiet, but Hunter caught her watching her son now and then, a look on her face that wasn't worry, exactly closer to wonder maybe. Near noon, Hunter wiped his hands on his trousers and nodded toward the cabin. I got bacon curing. Think we've earned a meal. Inside, the smell of smoke and salt filled the room as Hunter laid the meat into a skillet over the fire. Willa sliced what was left of the cornmeal loaf and set a pot to boil with dried beans and a pinch of sage from a tin. Mason leaned against the table, eyes following Hunter's movements. "You ever get bored out here?" Hunter flipped the bacon. "Plenty of things to do. Boredom's a luxury folks like us don't get often." May climbed into Willa's lap and rested her head there. "Can we stay more days?" Willa looked to Hunter, then back to her daughter. "We'll see." Hunter set the tin plates on the table, 3 for them, 1 for himself. He poured water from the crock and they ate without fuss, the kind of silence that came not from discomfort, but from filling bellies that hadn't known regular meals in too long. Afterward, Willa helped him stack the dirty plates. Her hands moved with practiced economy, not rushed, but steady. "You always cook like that?" she asked, rinsing the tin with boiled water. Hunter glanced over his shoulder. "Been feeding myself since I was 16. Got tired of burning beans." She chuckled under her breath. "You do all right." He leaned on the counter. "You, my ma taught me." She ran a boarding house before she passed. Said there were 2 things a woman needed to keep a roof over her strong hands and food folks remember. He studied her a moment. "You ever think of doing that again?" Willa set the plate down. "Starting over's hard. Especially with children. I've got land, more than I need, could build another room, maybe 2. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "That's a lot to offer someone you've only just met." Hunter didn't blink. "It's not charity, it's a chance. If you want it." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked to the window and looked out. The grass rippled in waves, soft with the breeze. Mason was tossing pebbles into the trough and May sat nearby, arranging twigs by size. She turned back to him slowly. "It's hard to know who to trust." "I won't ask you to," he said. "Not all at once, just stay, see what grows." She looked down at her hands, rough and calloused, then back at him. "I can sew, and I know how to keep a garden." Hunter nodded. "Then we'll plant one." That afternoon, Willa found a patch of ground behind the cabin where the sun hit long and hard. She took the hoe from behind the shed and began working the soil, her back straight, movements sure. Hunter watched from the fence line, then returned to his repairs. They didn't speak again until dusk, when the sky deepened to that faded orange and the air turned mild. Hunter stood beside her as she wiped her brow with her sleeve. "You picked a good spot," he said. "I've seen worse." He tilted his head. "You've done this before." She nudged a clump of earth with her boot. "When my husband was sick, I grew everything we ate. We couldn't afford the mercantile." Hunter's voice softened. "What did he have?" "Consumption. Took 2 years. Took everything else with it." He didn't speak, just let the silence settle like dust around them. Willa looked at him then, really looked. "You lost someone too?" Hunter nodded once. "My brother, shot south of Santa Fe." "Wrong place, wrong time, I'm sorry." "Me too." The breeze carried the scent of pine from the ridge. The children's laughter drifted from inside. Willa's voice was quiet. "I didn't think there was space left in me for anything new." Hunter met her gaze. "Doesn't have to be all at once." She looked down, then back at him. "No, but maybe piece by piece." Hunter gave a small nod, and she didn't look away. The last light slipped behind the hills. He offered her his arm, and she took it, walking back toward the cabin together as the lanterns began to glow. The next week brought a steady rhythm, not hurried, but full. Willa rose before the children, her steps quiet across the plank floor, and Hunter was already outside most mornings, tending to the mule or checking the chicken coop he'd patched together from scrap wood and rusted wire. They spoke in short exchanges at first, words measured like lumber chosen with care, but solid when set down. One morning, she found him sharpening a drawknife on the porch rail. A strip of rawhide stretched beside him. She leaned against the beam, arms crossed, watching the slow, careful motion of steel on stone. "You always make your own tack?" she asked. "I don't trust store-bought," he said without lifting his eyes. Straps fray too soon. Had a cinch snap outside Cimarron once broke 3 ribs when the gelding pitched me off. Willa's brow rose. You still ride. Wouldn't be much use if I didn't. He paused, then glanced up. You ever ride bareback? She shook her head. My husband wouldn't let me near the horses. Said it wasn't proper. Hunter laid the blade down and turned the strap in his hands. Well, he's not here now. Her mouth tightened, but she didn't look away. No, he isn't. The wind tugged at the hem of her shawl. Hunter passed her the strip of leather and gestured toward the draw knife. Try it. She hesitated, then stepped forward, taking the tool. Her hands moved slow at first, unsure. He didn't correct her, just watched. After a few strokes, the cut evened out. Hunter gave a quiet nod. You've got a steady hand. I had to learn, she said, eyes still on the leather. When Mason was born, I couldn't afford a midwife. Had to stitch myself up afterward. Hunter didn't respond with sympathy. He just said, You did what had to be done. She handed the knife back. That's how it's always been. He met her gaze. Doesn't have to stay that way. She looked at him a long moment, then turned back toward the cabin. That evening, after supper, they walked the edge of the pasture while the children gathered pebbles near the creek. The sky had gone pale with twilight, and the crickets were starting their song. Hunter carried a coil of wire over one shoulder, but he hadn't touched it since they'd left the barn. Willa broke the quiet. Why'd you build this place here? Didn't want neighbors, he said. Didn't want anyone telling me who I ought to be. You get many visitors, just the occasional trapper or fool with a rusted compass. She gave a soft laugh. So we're the exception. I didn't expect you, he said, but I'm not sorry you came. They stopped near the edge of the cedars. Willa leaned against a split trunk, her fingers grazing the bark. You're not what I expected either, she said. Hunter looked at her from beneath the brim of his hat. What did you expect? Harder lines, maybe less kindness. He didn't answer right away. Then, kindness is a choice. Same as anything. She watched him a moment more, then looked back toward the cabin. The warm glow of lamplight shone through the window. Mason's voice rose in surprise, followed by May's giggle. I should get them in for the night. Hunter nodded. I'll be here. The next day, Willa took Mason into the brush behind the cabin before dawn. When they returned, he was carrying 3 rabbits by the feet, dirt on his knees, eyes wide with pride. She cleaned them behind the shed, quiet and efficient, while Hunter set a small pit fire and boiled water for skinning. That night they ate well, and May fell asleep curled against Willa's side. Hunter waited until the children were tucked in, then stepped onto the porch where Willa stood, arms wrapped around herself against the cooling air. He handed her a tin cup of warmed cider. She took it without a word. You thinking of staying past the frost? He asked after a while. She didn't answer right away. Then, I think I could. He looked out into the dark. The winter's rough here. Snow piles high and the road disappears for weeks. Willa took a sip from the cup. I've lived through worse. Hunter turned toward her. You wouldn't be alone. She held his gaze. I know. He reached out, not to touch, just to be close. I want something real, Willa. Something built slow but strong. Her breath caught, and she set the cup down. Then, with a steadiness that came from years of holding everything in, she stepped to him and put her hand against his chest. I didn't think I'd want that again, she said. But I do with you. Hunter didn't speak. He just bent his head and she met him halfway. The kiss was unhurried, a promise rather than a claim. When they drew apart, her hand stayed over his heart. I'll help you build the extra room, he said, voice low. I'll make sure it's warm. They stood there a while longer, the night wrapping around them like a blanket, and neither of them needed to say more. The last of the late summer heat gave way to a cooler wind that rattled the cottonwoods and carried the scent of drying hay across the ridge. Willa stood barefoot in the doorway, the hem of her skirt brushing her ankles, watching the sun dip behind the hills. Her hands were dusted with flour, a bowl of cornmeal resting on the table behind her. Inside, Mason was showing May how to fold paper from an old ledger into shapes she called birds, while Hunter hauled in the last of the firewood for the evening. "Found a patch of wild onions east of the bluff," he said, setting the bundle down beside the hearth. "Could use them for supper tomorrow." Willa stepped back inside and reached for the kettle. "You always forage this time of year." "Only when the whiskey traders haven't passed through in a while. Trading's been thin since the army started tightening their routes." She filled the kettle and set it above the flame. "You ever serve?" He shook his head. "My brother tried. They turned him away, said he was too sharp with his tongue. He joined a freight outfit instead. Ran wagons for 2 years before he—" His voice dropped. "Before he didn't come back." Willa folded the edge of her shawl over her shoulder, eyes fixed on the fire. "The man I married was drafted in '63, came back changed, quiet and jumpy. Couldn't sit still after dark." Hunter rested a hand against the mantel, his knuckles rough from work. "You think that's why he turned cruel?" She didn't answer right away. "I think he was always angry. The war just gave him a reason not to hide it." Hunter glanced toward the children. "Mason ever talk about him?" "No. I think he remembers more than he lets on. Won't sleep with the door shut. Flinches when someone raises their voice." Hunter nodded once, then crossed to the window. "The boy's strong. But he shouldn't have to be all the time." Willa moved beside him, her shoulder just brushing his. "He won't have to be forever, not if we do right by him." Hunter's voice was low. "That's what I want." She turned toward him. "You ever think about having children of your own?" He hesitated. "I did. Once. Thought it'd happen with the woman I courted in Cimarron. Her father ran a tannery. She left after her brother took sick and the business folded. Went back east." "You loved her." He looked out into the dusk. "Enough to let her go when she said she'd never live this far from a town." Willa absorbed that, then said, "I didn't love my husband. I married him because I didn't want to go back to my uncle's farm in Missouri. He had a temper worse than the man I ended up with." Hunter turned to her, his voice quiet. "You ever had someone who just wanted to take care of you?" She met his eyes. "Never." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers lacing gently with hers. "Then let me be the first." Outside, Mason called to them, his voice bright. "There's light over the ridge, like fire." Hunter stepped onto the porch, Willa close behind. The last stretch of sun had flared orange behind the hills, but beyond that, a faint red glow pulsed against the darkening sky. Willa's voice tightened. "That's not sunset." Hunter's jaw set. "Could be a grass fire or someone burning off old brush. Either way, we'll need buckets at the ready." He turned to Mason. "Go fill the trough again. Keep the pails near the well." Mason nodded and ran. May clung to Willa's skirt. "Is it coming here?" "No, sweetheart," Willa said, kneeling beside her. "We're just being careful." Hunter saddled his horse and looked back at Willa. "I'll ride up to the ridge. Won't be but 20 minutes. If it's moving fast, we'll need to dig a line behind the barn." Willa stepped forward. "I'll keep the cabin ready. You be careful." He met her eyes. "Always." He rode into the dark, the sound of hooves fading into the wind. Willa turned back toward the children, guiding them inside with calm she didn't quite feel. She lit a second lantern and placed it near the door, then rolled the water barrel into the corner and tied a strip of damp cloth across the bottom of the door. By the time Hunter returned, his coat was streaked with soot, and his face was flushed from the ride. "It's a controlled burn," he said, catching his breath. "A rancher clearing sagebrush before the frost. He saw our smoke and rode over to warn me." Willa exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing. "You're sure?" "I spoke with him myself. He's got it watched with 4 hands and a plow team. It won't reach us." She closed the distance between them and cupped his jaw with one hand. I thought you were riding into danger." Hunter leaned into her touch, the weariness of the ride settling into his bones. "Would have if it meant keeping you safe." Willa stepped closer, her other hand resting against his chest. "You already have." He kissed her again, deeper this time, not hurried but certain. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I want to stay," she whispered. "Not just because it's safe, but because I want this, you, the land, a life." Hunter wrapped his arms around her and held her close. "Then it's yours, all of it." The lantern light flickered across the walls, and outside the wind carried only the sound of the trees. For the first time in years, Willa felt the weight she carried shift into something that didn't hurt. Something that might grow into joy. By the time the first frost laid its pale hand across the field, the second room was finished. Its walls were tight-planked and chinked with clay Willa had helped pull from the dry creek, her knuckles raw but steady. Hunter had hung the door himself, rough cedar with a latch he carved one evening while Mason read aloud from the tattered farmer's almanac they'd bartered for in Trinidad. That morning, Willa stood in the doorway of the new room, arms folded over a shawl she'd stitched from old feed sacks and dyed with walnut hulls. The quilt on the small bed was one she'd pieced in Kansas, back before her world tilted. She ran her fingers over the worn stitching, then turned as Hunter stepped in with a crate of dried apples. "We can store these in here for now," he said. "Plenty cool at night," she nodded. "I was thinking we'd move May's things in soon. Give her and Mason their own space." Hunter set the crate down and brushed his palms on his trousers. "That'd be good. They're getting older. Mason's near to outgrowing his boots." Willa reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small wrapped bundle. "I've been working on that. Found some hide in the barn loft, soft enough to shape." Hunter took the bundle, unwrapping it slowly. Inside were moccasins stitched with careful hands, the soles thick and flexible. "You made these?" She looked down. "Taught myself from a Ute woman near the San Juan. She traded me the pattern for a spool of thread and a tin of honey." Hunter turned the moccasins over in his hands. "He'll be proud to wear them." Willa met his eyes. "I want them to grow up knowing what it means to build something with care." He stepped closer, his voice low. "They already are." That night, after the children had gone to bed, Willa stepped onto the porch where Hunter was sitting. The lantern beside him cast a yellow glow across the ledger he was marking. She eased down beside him, the night air sharp with the promise of snow. "What are you writing?" she asked. "Just marking what we've got stored. Cornmeal, salt pork, dried beans, enough to last if the passes close early." She leaned back against the post. "I never thought I'd be planning for a winter like this, not with someone." Hunter set the ledger aside. "It's different when you've got someone to plan for." "I used to think survival was enough," she said. "But this is more than that." He reached for her hand. "It is." She was quiet a moment. "I've been thinking about marrying again." Hunter turned toward her fully, waiting. "I never thought I would," she said. "But when I picture the future, it's here with you." His hand tightened gently around hers. "Willa, I've wanted that since the second day you were here, not out of pity, not to fill a quiet house, but because you and those children already feel like home." Her breath shivered out. "Then say it plain." He smiled, eyes crinkling. "Will you marry me, Willa Nolan?" She leaned in and kissed him, slow and sure. "Yes," she whispered against his mouth. "Yes, I will." They married under the cottonwood tree behind the cabin, with snow drifting soft across the field and the children standing close. Mason in a shirt Hunter had sewn new buttons onto, May clutching a sprig of dried sage. The preacher from Trinidad came on horseback, his coat crusted with road dust, and spoke the words clear while the wind carried the scent of wood smoke and pine. Afterward, Willa poured coffee into tin cups and passed around biscuits she'd baked that morning. Mason handed out slices of smoked deer meat from the cellar, and May offered hunters candy made from honey and dried berries. That evening, after the children had fallen asleep in their new room, Willa stood in the doorway of the main cabin, watching the firelight flicker across the floor. Hunter wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Never thought I'd have this," he said. "You deserve it," she murmured. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And I'll spend the rest of my life proving you do too." They lay together that night in the bed he'd built with his own hands, the quilts warm, the silence filled with breath and heartbeats. Outside, the wind brushed the roof like a lullaby, and inside they found rest not from weariness, but because they'd come through the hard and into the peace. By spring, the garden Willa had planted behind the cabin sprouted green and sturdy. Mason helped turn the soil each morning, while May learned to carry water without spilling it from the gourd. Willa taught her how to pinch the suckers off tomato vines, and Hunter built a trellis for the beans using cedar poles and cord made from twisted grass. They received word that her brother had been found in a mining camp near Silverton, half-starved and drunk in a ditch. Willa didn't write back. Instead, she stitched a new apron for May and finished a second pair of moccasins for Mason, this time with blue thread stitched into the toe. Hunter gathered timber from the far ridge and began drawing up plans for a barn. Willa read by lamplight in the evenings. Sometimes they sat in silence, her feet resting in his lap, the fire warm on their faces. They didn't talk about the past anymore, not because it hurt, but because the present was full. One morning, Willa stood in the pasture with her hands resting on her belly, eyes closed to the sun. Hunter stepped beside her, his hand covering hers. "How long have you known?" he asked. 2 weeks. He touched her jaw with the backs of his fingers. "You all right?" "I am," she said. "I truly am." He kissed her then, slow and full of promise, and the wind lifted through the grass like a hymn. They raised 3 children in that cabin. Mason grew into a quiet, capable man who carved his initials into the same porch rail where Hunter had once sharpened a drawknife. May became a teacher, one who knew the names of every wildflower in the valley. And the child born that winter, a girl with Willa's dark eyes and Hunter's steady hands, grew up knowing what home meant. Years later, folks in the territory would still talk about the woman who showed up on foot with 2 children and built a life out of nothing but grit and kindness. They'd speak of the man who took her in not out of pity, but because he saw her strength and wanted to walk beside it. And in that quiet place just north of Trinidad, where the sage grew thick and the wind never stayed long, Willa and Hunter Callahan lived out their days in peace, side by side, every sunrise a blessing earned. They never needed to say "I love you" aloud, not because it wasn't true, but because it was in every nail hammered, every hand held, every quiet evening spent watching the sky shift from gold to dusk. And that was more than enough.